my name is Andy and welcome to Basics of Composition 1. So today we're going to be talking about different approaches to writing for a BFS style drum crew. And a lot of this is going to be informed by my own personal way of writing for drum crews. But I'm going to outline a few different ways of starting a song. So off the top of my head, there are three big ways to start a song. You can start with a common rhythm. That is a rhythm which is common to a culture or a genre of music, and you can build on that common rhythm once you've got it established. Or you can start with a hook, that is, you start with a memorable phrase and then you build the other parts of your rhythm around it. And the third way is to cover a hook. So let's talk about common rhythms. Societies have a shared history of common rhythms, and songs are often built around these foundational rhythms. So these are rhythms where they occur in a ton of songs. They may be the prerequisites of a genre, like you have to have some variant of this rhythm to be considered in this genre. Or they may by themselves define a genre, as in it is only this genre if this one single rhythm is present. So let's start with the rhythms that you're most likely to be familiar with. So these are Western dance music rhythms. So you've got your 4 on the floor, trance, rave, house, EDM, techno, 4 on the floor rhythm. That's the boomt, boomt, boomt. And you've got your drum and bass rhythm. So there's a variety of drum and bass rhythms, but they're all based on this kind of 2-step, 2 bass drum, boom, tap, kind of rhythm. And there's a whole tree of drum and bass genres which kind of spiral out from there. So if we look at other cultures with a very strong drumming culture tend to have sets of traditional or folkloric rhythms which crop up time and time again and can be played and elaborated on as a piece in itself. So for instance, in the Arabic rhythm tradition, you have this zar rhythm. This is a really common rhythm, so you may also recognize this as a rhythm used in reggaeton and other Caribbean musical styles, and I believe it also crops up as an African djembe drumming rhythm as well. Then there's the malfouf, which is what you may have heard referred to as the 3-3-2 rhythm. Now, if we talk about African rhythm, Africa as a whole has many drumming cultures, other than the West African drumming that we here are most familiar with, each of which has its own traditional rhythms dating back many, many years, and which share some common rhythms with the Arabic drumming traditions as well. I don't actually know a lot about African drumming, so I'm going to leave that to the experts. With the transatlantic slave trade, the African diaspora caused these rhythms to spread out and be further elaborated on in other countries. So in Cuba, you've got the unique culture of Afro-Cuban rhythms, where the clave, most specifically the son clave, is the foundation stone of Afro-Cuban music. Another clave found in Cuban music is the rumba clave. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Which is quite similar to the son clave, but with one note slightly shifted, and it gives it this lovely syncopated feel. Another place that many African musical traditions ended up is in Brazil, where they mixed with Portuguese military drumming and indigenous musical traditions to form many genres, the most famous of which is samba. But as you travel across Brazil, you'll also find other folkloric traditions which themselves have a strong history, such as maracatu. Or baião. The world is a large place, and I've probably missed out more rhythmic traditions than I've even touched on here. Off the top of my head, Japanese taiko, Korean festival drumming, the entire world of Chinese drumming, which I find impenetrable. I don't know anything about it, but it sounds amazing. You've got reggae with its 3 characteristic rhythms of 1 drop, steppers and rockers. And there are even historical traditions to draw on, like the almost forgotten British medieval frame drum traditions. So the idea with starting with a foundational rhythm is this isn't your entire song. You don't just play this rhythm and say, yep, great, this is the song. This is your foundation. Think of it like if you're writing a song. So say you're going to write a drum and bass song, so you know your drum and bass drum beat is going to go like boom, but you have complete freedom as to the melody and chords that you put on top of that. In our case, we don't have melody and we don't have chords, but we do have multiple different drums. So the drums that aren't playing the foundational rhythms act as your melody. The next big category is starting with a hook. So here's the definition of a hook from Wikipedia. A hook is a musical idea, often a short riff, passage, or phrase that is used in popular music to make a song appealing and to catch the ear of the listener. So we have different goals with BFS Drum Crew music. We don't always want to catch the ear of the listener. Sometimes we want something that is hypnotic, or that is an appropriate soundtrack, or that expresses a particular idea or theme. We're not always trying to make something catchy as such, but we can still use hooks. As an example of a hook, in part 1, I talked about Hammer of the Gods, which was a song that I wrote for Winter Drummers 2015. And the hook for Hammer of the Gods is the bass line, which starts with dum, da-da-dum, dum, dum, dum. And the bass line is something you can sing. There are many definitions of hook, but one of the useful definitions, is something you can whistle or sing or beatbox that will make somebody go, oh yeah, that's that song. So there are a bunch of ways to start with the hook. You can start by just playing around, tapping on something or beatboxing. And if you're doing that, record yourself. Record all of your potentials. So for instance, if I'm just sitting around and going da 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 dum ba dum ba dum ba da 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 dum ba dum ba dum ba da 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 boom ba dum, and I'm like, yeah, I could make a song out of that. Record it. And then transcribe it into hydrogen and start thinking about how you can lay out other instruments to go with that hook. For instance, with that particular hook, a rhythm like would work well. Another absolutely classic way to find a hook, and one that I know a lot of people use, is pick your time signature and your tempo and just scatter notes randomly across the hydrogen grid until you find something which feels catchy enough. That's a completely valid way of writing, and honestly, I've got some pretty good songs out of that method. Another interesting way of generating a hook is to start from a mnemonic or some poetry. So often we write a tune and then we will write mnemonics to remember it, but it's possible to start with the mnemonic. So here's one I've come up with just off the top of my head, and this would be a very wintry rhythm. The soft snow scatters surrounding us in sweet silence. The soft snow scatters surrounding us in sweet silence. The soft snow scatters surrounding us in sweet silence. The soft snow scatters surrounding us in sweet silence. And that's something you could have your toms playing while your bass and your snare play something else around them. The benefit of this is that your song is automatically thematically appropriate and you've got a built-in mnemonic straight away. I've actually written a couple of pieces for which I wrote an entire poem and divided each chunk of lines into a pattern. So, for instance, I've had one which had 4 verses, one for each element, with a different instrument taking that poetry-based lead line for each verse. And that led to some very interesting and unconventional patterns, because the patterns of our speech don't necessarily easily fall into Western musical notation. I'd love to see more people using this approach, as it's a really good way of breaking you out of the conventional tempos and time signatures that we often fall into. And the last approach that I'd like to talk about is covering a song. So, this is something that's kind of become a bit more popular in recent years. Taking a song and straight up taking a recognizable drum pattern from it, or taking the rhythm of a lyric or the rhythm of a synth or guitar and turning that into a drum pattern. So the difference between using a common rhythm, like I talked about at the start of the video, and covering a song, as I mentioned, a common rhythm is found in a lot of different songs. It may be very common to a particular genre, it may define a genre entirely, whereas covering a song tends to involve taking the hook from a song, so taking the thing that makes that song unique. Depending on how you use it, you may end up taking the hook from that song and using it as your hook, in which case, yeah, you're pretty much doing a straight up cover. One example of that is a song that I covered as our party beat for Processionals 2016, which is Run Boy Run by Woodkid, which is an amazing, very percussion heavy dance song. We weren't really hurting for songs, but somebody suggested, hey, this is a great song. We should use this as our party beat because it's great to dance to. So we did. We just took the song and straight up played it on drums. And it was really fun, but at the same time, because we tend to listen to Western music a lot, this often locks you into Western music, tempos, structures, time signatures, which can get a little boring. Often the thing that distinguishes Western songs from each other is their instruments, their lyrics, the way the song is put together and engineered, the sound of the song. And because we're playing it all on the same instruments, it's very easy for it to sound samey. Of course, you don't need to pull the entire hook and use it as your hook. Taking a chunk of a song or taking a hook and using it almost like harmony, so you've got one instrument playing your melody, which is the hook that makes your song unique, but having another instrument playing the hook from a different song underneath it can add some real interest. Similarly, you can do things such as take inspiration from a song. So take a little 5-beat phrase from the middle of a drum beat or something. Or you can take a drum beat or hook and play it backwards. Or shuffle it. One approach that I've used before is to take the mood of a song and attempt to re-engineer that song from first principles without using any of the original song, but still attempting to capture the mood. If you described the song to somebody else in one sentence, how would you describe it? Take that and attempt to program a song that follows the same description. I've actually done that for one of the pieces I wrote for Winter Drummers, which was very slightly based on a Fear Factory song called Damaged. And obviously, if I was going to jack that, it would be super recognizable. So what I did was I took the idea of strings of eighth notes and fast bass trills, and I tried to write my own song about that, and it came out completely different. The song in question is one that Harbingers still play, which is called Repercussions. And if you compare the two, honestly, I'm not even sure if you would say there's a lot of the DNA of the original left. It is its own completely different song, but it started out as a cover. And that's a great example of how you can start with a song as inspiration, but still end up with something that you couldn't really call a cover. That is its own completely different and unique thing. Okay, so you have your hook or your foundational rhythm. Let's talk about how to turn that into a pattern. So the approach that I most often find myself using is dividing the instrument into a melody and support roles, or potentially a melody, harmony, and support roles. And what I mean by this is the melody is going to be the hook. And that's one instrument or potentially two instruments splitting a line between the two of them. And they are going to be the main interest in the song, sort of the catchiness of the song. And for that, you'd often use something like a djembe, one of the very common ones, but also something like a dual tom would work really well. And the idea is because you have multiple notes, you can make something that sounds very interesting with only having one set of people playing it. You can also have the same effect by splitting a line between two instruments. So, for instance, I wrote a song called Supercharger for Processionals 2016, where the line sounds like and that's floor toms playing the high part and basses playing the low part, and then the snares are just sitting on a foundational-ish, I'll talk about that in a second, foundational-ish beat. And the important thing is that while the toms have the melody, the basses are just clicking the beat on their sticks, and vice versa. The basses have the melody, the toms are clicking on their sticks. You could push this a little further. You could have the occasional tom or bass beat interweaving into the other pattern, but if both of them were playing continuously, it would be too much. So something that comes up a lot is, why not a fun part for everybody? Why not give everybody something that's intricate, challenging, and unique? It depends on what band you have, really. If you only have snare, tom, and bass, then yeah, you're probably okay. You can probably give everyone something fairly challenging and fairly intricate, and because there aren't that many instruments, it'll probably sound alright. Your toms might get lost in the mix unless you have a lot of toms, because the basses tend to drown them out. But yeah, it'll be okay. But if you have bass, mid-bass, floor tom, high tom, snare, high tension snare, cymbal, shaker, and block/cowbell, that's 9 instruments. You give everyone something intricate and unique. It's mostly going to sound like soup. Now, I'm not going to say this is impossible. So there are some really talented tune writers within BFS who have managed stuff like this. There are tunes where every single part sounds pretty good on its own. Like, you can solo the mid basses and they have a compelling pattern. You can solo the block and it's got a compelling pattern. Personally, I find this really hard. And commonly what it leads to is something where it doesn't really have a clear pulse. There's a lot going on and there's a lot of sound, but you can't really dance to it. And sometimes, well, sometimes that's what you want. Sometimes you want something that is really intense and really busy. And it's almost more of a soundtrack or a sound effect, an ambience, just this overwhelming feeling, and you deliberately want it to be undanceable. Like everything else, know the guidelines and then break them. There's also another caveat, which is if you give everyone intricate patterns without any clear pulse or clear one, you may end up with something that is very difficult for your drummers to play. If nobody can lock into anybody else, then it might just be a case of play it and hope. And that's not ideal. All that said, I said you've got a melody, maybe a harmony, which is playing something that is still unique, but that is less complex than the melody and functionally sits below it in the tune. But that's not saying that drums which are playing the foundational beat have to be boring. Here's snare pattern 2 for Supercharger. The idea behind this snare pattern was that you start with the foundational beat. You make that louder and more prominent than everything else, and then you can throw in the interesting stuff. Alright, that's everything I've got to talk about. It's live demo time. Let's take the little phrase that we used earlier and turn that into a pattern. That phrase that we came up with earlier. The soft snow scatters surrounding us in sweet silence. The soft snow scatters surrounding us in sweet silence. How many beats does that even have? The soft snow scatters surrounding us in sweet silence. The soft snow. It's actually in 4/4, weirdly enough. It ends up being like 8 beats long. Doesn't feel like it. Soft snow scatters is in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's kind of like a 7 followed by a 9, I guess. And together they average to 8 each. So let's see how that goes. I'm really curious as to how this is going to work out. So I'm going to set this to, so we've got 8th notes here. This is a development version of Hydrogen, so it might look a little different, especially the size thing here. And also, this is, if you just watched video 1, this is the updated version of the BFS sound pack, which contains a bunch of instruments that I've recorded mostly from my own drums. Except this kind of, I mean, this horrible tom is from my own drums, but it's not the best. Someday I'll do a better one. Okay, so soft snow scatters. Okay, so I'm gonna have to make this 8 beats long, I think. And I'm going to have it be a lead up, so the soft snow. So soft is my first one. And I think I'm gonna divide this between the bass and the tom, but I'm just gonna do it on the bass first, just to get a feel for how it lies in the bar. So soft snow scatters surrounding us in sweet silence. The okay, so that's kind of bland. There's especially this long piece in the middle, which is just bum 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 bum. So let's say we're gonna compose it for double toms. So let's take this, I'm gonna make this small tom a little louder. And then, so soft snow scatters surrounding us in sweet okay, so now we have something where you've got a similar pattern here and here, which is also quite nice. There's a saying in jazz, repetition legitimizes. So if you have bits which are repeated, you start hearing them over and over again, and it feels like a theme somehow. So let's listen to that. Okay, it's weird, but I kind of like it. So let's see. Let's add some stick patterns to anchor it, because currently both the bass and the tom have the patterns have a lot of long spaces. So, doom doom ka ka doom. Bass stick, doom doom ka ka do doom. I'm gonna mute my toms now. So I'm thinking, if this is like a 7 and a 9, it would be nice to have that feel. So 1, 2, boom. And so that's the start of my 9. Okay, that sounds playable, and it's something that could stand on its own as a part without being super intricate. And let's do the same thing for the toms now. So I'm going to use the solo switch to turn off everything but the toms. Okay, so they just have this massive silence at the start, which is really disconcerting. I'm going to give them, let's see, something like that, maybe. Let's turn on the tom rim. And again, we want this sort of feel of 7 and 9. So if I added one here, then I'd get this. So that here is the start of my. So that would be 4 and 4. But I don't want it to sound like that. I don't want it to be boom 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 boom. That's not how the tune's going to feel. So I'm going to move this to here. Doom doom boom. Dun, dun, boom, da, da, dun, 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 and now you have this one is shortened and one is lengthened. So dun 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 ba dun dun. Well, this second half is kind of bugging me a little because it's still very abstract. Dun ba bum dun 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 ba dun. Dun ba bum dun 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 ba bum bum. Dun dun. What about this? Dun ba bum dun 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 ba ba bum bum. Nah, it's this long string of notes which isn't very memorable. Okay, so it's got something to it now. So what I'm doing is I'm clicking the 7, then I'm clicking the 9. And let's actually formalize that by adding, let's say we add a shaker. And let's have the shaker do something in 7 and then something in 9. So forward, back ghost. Shook, 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 shook. So I'm going to go into 16th notes. So here's a tip. A nice way to get a shaker to turn around if you're using an odd number of notes is to use this kind of chicka-chick pattern. So if you're playing an odd number of notes, you would be playing like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and your accents would start going forward, and then they would turn around and go backwards. If you want all your accents to always go forward, you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, chicka check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, chicka check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, chicka check, chicka chicka tap, chicka chicka tap, chicka chicka tap, and that can make things easier for the shaker players. It can allow you to do more complex things. It can allow you to lead into things where, for instance, say your break absolutely requires the shakers to be going forward to start it. You can make sure that they're going backwards at the end of their last pattern, regardless of where you call it, by using that turnaround double shake. So I'm going to do that here. I've got myself set to 16th note resolution. So I'm going to do, so I've got 1, 2, 3, so I need a back, forward, back. And I'm going to make those ghost notes. So that's like this. Great, okay. And I'm going to do the same thing for the 9. And so we've got 3 here, so I'm going, and then the 9 is just an extra one of those. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And here's the back ghost note. 4, back, forward, back. So the shaker part is not super inspired. This is one that is definitely a support part. I've never played a lot of shaker other than samba shakers. So, and in samba the shaker does tend to be very fast, but not ultimately that interesting. So I tend to, I don't know, I tend to write boring shaker parts. What can I say? But I find that the shaker excels as a support. Like in here, it is really reinforcing that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that 7, 9, 7, 9 feel. And I kind of want to do the same thing with the snare. So to give a counterexample, because we are 8 long, what would happen if we just said, well, the snare's going to be playing in 4/4? Let's have a look. So I'm going to fill all the notes, and then I'm just going to make the snare play a rock backbeat over the top of it. This might be awful. Let's have a look.
Okay, it sounds really strange because now we have this really strong 7 and 9 feel. The bar begins here, so the snare actually sounds like it's playing on the 4 instead of the 3. I mean, it's a mood, but I don't think it's the one I want. So I'm gonna get rid of that. But sometimes when you're writing stuff, sometimes it's worth pursuing ideas that you just go, oh, that's not gonna work. Just do it. It's just a few minutes, and it will. Sometimes it will be laughably bad. Sometimes actually it'll be pretty good, and you just end up elaborating on it. So, what else? We could go with what the shaker's playing, um, but I think that'd be really boring. What about? I'm just going to put down some random notes. And then I don't really know what this is going to sound like. This is definitely a random clicky method. So what I've got here is because I have a lot of things which aren't aligned with one of the strict beats. I have a lot of syncopation going on, and again, it's a mood, but it doesn't sound like what I want this tune to sound like. I want it to be quite slow, ponderous, wintry feeling. This is currently sounding very military. Don't really like that. So I'm going to clear that out. What about if it was very on the beat? So now that is absolutely, I am smashing 7 and now I'm smashing 9, and yeah, it's got that squareness that I'm looking for, but now it is too much. So let's see, what if we remove some of that, but we keep the emphasis on the start because I quite like that. But we had some syncopation, but not too much. Da-da-dum, bum, bum, bum. Okay, I really like this. I like that kind of this syncopation where it's like bum, dum, bum, bum, bum. But what's happening here is at the very end, this note here is actually running into these ones at the start, and it's causing the one to get lost. So it's that one feel that I said I liked is now it's shifted. So the one almost feels like it's here. And that's really confusing. So I'm going to take these and I'm going to shift them a little bit. And now we'll have a pause before the one. Stick the ghost notes in there. Okay, I quite like that. It's got enough notes to feel like it's not really lumpy, but it doesn't have so many notes that it feels super complex. It's got enough syncopation to be syncopated, so it's not super square, but it's not got so much syncopation that the one disappears or it starts becoming kind of almost like Latin feeling, or Latin or tech metal. If it sounds like a party, it's edging towards Latin. If it sounds like a cement mixer, it's edging towards tech metal. Yeah, okay. So here's the other thing. When I was listening to that, I was playing along. Do this. Try and learn your parts as you write them, because what you're going to need to do is evaluate how hard is this part. Is it possible for anybody to play it at this tempo? You can always go, well, okay, it's not possible to play at this tempo, but maybe at 100. Okay, that's way easier. But I kind of want it to be a little more rapid. I will talk about my dislike for 100 BPM in a future video. This snare pattern at 120 BPM, I would evaluate it as quite complex. I wouldn't want to teach this to a class of beginners, but I would probably trust like a more experienced BFS snare drummer to play this. I can get it in a few tries, which is, given how long I've been playing snare, is reasonable. So yeah, that'll do. And now we have a pattern. Alright, let's leave that there for today. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.